Hello and welcome to the first Vegan Interactions Live. Yeah, this is a bit of a test run. I have with me here Jasmine, known as Vegan Ariel on YouTube. And really, just wanted to thank Jasmine for reaching out. We were just talking before we went live. I think a lot of these chats oftentimes happen in a comment section, which I think is a challenging place to really have a productive exchange of ideas, especially when those ideas are different. So yeah, I think that's really what we're going to try to do here today. So as you're joining us, Nikki Trashcark, it's great to see you. Let us know you're here in the chat. This is also a little bit about community building for anyone who joins us. But do ask, with all these things, keeping things in the chat respectful. Yeah, and I think just a general note to you, Jasmine, I have a particular focus on language, so if I do say anything that's a bit different, it's probably because it is. So feel free to just ask if something's not really kind of jiving, because it might actually start some interesting discussion about why, certain words, were there. Hello to Philip, Tom, Guywan. This is great to see everybody joining in. So the topic for today is basically, it's a pretty straightforward one, right? Are human issues relevant to animal rights? And I think more specifically how to navigate these types of issues. So I think we were just chatting before we got started, and I think there's a fair amount of ground to cover. We're going to, obviously, I don't think we're going to be able to compress this all into an hour or less, which we're going to try to do. But hopefully by the end of the discussion, we've kind of started to understand some of these perspectives a bit better, because I think we all have our own unique perspective. So with that, is there anything that you specifically wanted to start with? Before we kind of start more of the framing?
Okay, so I just wanted to say hi. I run the channel Vegan Ariel, and I also run a Facebook group called Right With Vegans. My channel focuses on veganism and conservatism, so that's quite an interesting thing. So did you?
Yeah, I think I did mean to give you a bit of a heads up on this, but you know how everybody always asks kind of like, what's your vegan story? I thought we might put a bit of a spin on that, and maybe, I don't know if you'd want to share briefly your activist story, like what made you start getting active? I'm happy to start off if you want a minute to ponder it, but I imagine you kind of already have something chambered up.
Oh, okay. So I've been vegan for about 10 years, and then I started vegan activism probably around 9 years ago. So I started doing outreach in my local area, and that was quite interesting at the beginning because it was, I don't know, about 9 years ago, it was more focused on vegan and vegetarian outreach. So that was like the focus, and it was quite funny because not all of them were vegan there, but I was kind of trying to convince them to go vegan. Then it kind of, I don't know, then I continued doing work in my local area until I got banned from my local outreach.
Which maybe will come up in our discussion, yeah.
Yeah, and that was because they didn't particularly like my YouTube channel. But yeah, that was quite funny. So yeah, I got banned from my local outreach, and I still do YouTube, and I still do activism in my local area. I do kind of beach walking and that kind of thing. But it's a bit sad because we've got like 2 separate vegan milking groups now, which seems a bit ridiculous.
So there's been a proper divide then. So there is a substantial number of people on both kind of sides of it.
Well,
yeah, and just real quickly, we were talking about this before we went live, but Tom's talking about the sound. We were having a play before we got started. I think it's a webcam mic that we're gonna. We've kind of done some diagnostics, and we're working with what we've got. I think we've tried out, and this is the best of the options. So
yeah.
It's not to answer your question, Tom. It's not just you. But yeah, so it sounds like there was a bit of a split. Because I know I guess. Backing up, it sounds like you kind of 10 years and then pretty much straight away got into activism like within a year or so. I mean, my story is probably quite similar. I mean, I guess because not everyone does that, do they?
I don't know really. I mean, it was, I think 10 years ago it was a way of actually meeting other vegans, whereas now I think you can probably meet vegans more easily than doing outreach.
True. Yeah, I guess there's more kind of social media and meetup groups and that than, because I'm 7 years.
Okay.
I always have to check the dates. I actually just passed my, what do they call it these days, the vegan anniversary. So, but yeah, I was in Singapore actually when I started living vegan, which I mean that's an interesting discussion just because
Yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of pressures that limit being able to campaign. Street outreach, like, I mean, I think you could perhaps request in advance and get a permit, but basically it wasn't a
Hmm.
thing. And even social media is monitored to effect, although I think that's if I guess that's a whole different topic, but social media is probably monitored in most countries. But I just basically did like a water fast to try to raise awareness
Okay.
around veganism, but I didn't get properly involved into like street stuff until I moved to the UK.
Mm.
But yeah, it sounds like we've both been in the activism scene for
Quite a
at
while,
least half a
yeah.
decade. Yeah. Um, yeah, it sounds like it's an interesting thing you
Is the
say
lighting
about.
better now?
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
cause can you see the comments as well? Because you'll be able to see those come through on Streamyard, I think.
Okay, yeah.
There's a tab for that if you want to. I'll pull up a few as I can that are relevant. But it's interesting. Trash Carcass is saying didn't really meet any other vegans until I became an activist. So that kind of supports what you were saying.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I don't know. Like, I kind of, I kind of am a bit. I don't know. After I was kicked out of my local vegan group, I feel a bit nervous to go up to vegan activists on the street because I think they're going to be radically left wing, and I'm kind of a bit like, well, I find that there's a complete divide because it's like if you're like, well, I don't particularly like Black Lives Matter because I find some of their ideas not very good. They support mass immigration, which is an issue. They're not really concerned about the high single parent household rate in the Black community. Then it's like, well, you're no longer vegan, and so it's kind of, I don't know. I just find it a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, because I guess the whole thing we kind of tee this up around is kind of the relevance of human rights. I guess just kind of
Yeah.
taking a step back. Like, I mean, I personally don't like the word intersectionality that much just because I don't think it's that accurate. I prefer kind of thinking about it more like overlapping or entanglement, which we can kind of get into. I appreciate that's kind of a nuance that isn't specifically what we're talking about, but
But
I think just
yeah,
at the core, do you think like there's a relationship where one informs the other, or do you think they kind of operate separately?
well, I think that I think that entanglement is a concept that is in your head and isn't it doesn't actually exist in reality. So I can say that veganism was entangled with being pro-life, for example, because both are protecting innocent beings, both don't know. But with certain animals like oysters, we give oysters the benefit of the doubt, but then with human babies at a certain age, we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. So it's like, I could say it's entangled with veganism, but it's entangled in my head, but it might not be entangled in your head, and so that's kind of the issue I find.
Well, and I guess I mean that those are some specific examples which I guess we can unpack, but I guess I'm more thinking from at the root, just kind of like a lot of injustices involve some level of depersonification or reducing the personhood and stripping away the individuality. So that happens to our fellow animals, and that happens to humans in certain contexts. And I mean, I would like to think that if we have more people who are vegan, they're gonna have more respect for our fellow humans, and also potentially vice versa, that more respect for fellow humans. Because let's be honest, that's an issue. Like even if everyone was vegan, like there's still human on human violence that is, you know, the issues in the world go broader than speciesism. I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'd like to think there's a way to help each other. Now, how we go a whole separate thing, but I think at the first thing for me is just to kind of see that there's the potential for a relationship there, regardless of how we fall on the issues like pro-life, pro-choice, like just that there is a relationship.
I I mean, are you saying that? So what I really don't understand with intersectionality is the fact that it seems to be this idea that if you are, like, I don't know, if you believe animals should have the right to live, right? You believe that humans should have, I don't know, more rights or whatever. And I find that there are always contradictions to that. So, for example, when you look at people on the far left, they basically that doesn't agree with their particular political opinion, and that's not done in order to that's done in order to, well, according to social identity theory, that's done in order to make themselves feel better about themselves. And I mean, that's what racists do as well. And so it's, I mean, you can be someone who is racist and vegan because maybe being racist makes you feel better about yourself. Maybe being nasty to conservatives makes you feel better about yourself. But you can still be vegan. And I think that human rights and animal rights are very different, especially when we talk about very complex issues like abortion, or we talk about, I don't know, something else, Black Lives Matter. I think that they're much more complex issues than animal rights. I mean, we can see animals are dying. We can't.
Yeah. I hear this. I think. Go ahead.
The other thing is that so I looked into a number of. I know this is I looked into a number of far right parties when I was doing a video on voting, and I find that with the voting thing, people will say, well, if you don't vote Labour, you're not really vegan, and it's kind of like, well, there are actually far right parties that have better animal welfare standards, like the Patriotic Alternative, than the Labour Party, and it's very, I don't know, it's quite interesting because these parties are obviously, I mean, the Patriotic Alternative, they have policies which say that they want to give, like, not deny education to ethnic minorities, children from ethnic minority backgrounds, but then they have really good animal welfare standards. They want to encourage, you know, small farmers and get rid of factory buying. They want to get rid of vivisection. They want to get rid of halal meat. I mean, it's like you can clearly be racist in many ways and still be pro animal rights or at least animal welfare.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to say, because I think at 1% of the population, I think any political party is going to gravitate much more towards animal welfare than anything that's, you know, abolitionist or you know, focused on ending all use. I think that's just, so I think if we look at policy by policy, I think some parties you could make a case for one against, but I agree it's not like a direct line of this is an animal rights party and this is a, you know, this isn't, because no party supports a true animal rights, you know, idea.
True, unless it's some kind of vegan party.
Yeah, and I guess they do exist, and I think they're trying to. I think it's at this stage more kind of working within. I mean, maybe it's worth just taking a step back, because to me, there's two things. There's veganism, and then there's animal rights, which to me are similar but not exactly the same. I guess looking at the vegan definition, I've got that just for like context for those who might be curious. I mean, this is the long form discussion because for the longest time, basically a shorter version of this was circulating around, and it was missing the, and by extension, talking about animals, and they mean non-human animals here, I think, and then humans and the environment. So I appreciate there's different reads on this, that it could just be that this might just happen as an offshoot, and it's not necessarily part of the purpose. However, to me, it's at least in the definition that it's not just other animals. There is a human element in the very definition, or at least the current definition. So I guess we're on a theory of veganism, and then we can get more into the other stuff. But
well, by humans, I think they mean human health more than anything. Because if they meant human rights, then it would be like they would be concerned about fair trade food. They wouldn't be labeling cosmetics as vegan if they use bad working conditions for people. They, you know, it would be, you know, a lot more than it is now. It wouldn't be a Western focused political issue. It would be something about buying fair trade food or actually helping humans in ways that everyone could probably agree with would help. I also find that the new definition of veganism a little bit confusing, because if you look at I've done some research on veganism, and basically the way that different types of vegans act, your reasons for the vegan, that's how you act. So if you say I'm vegan for animal rights, then you're more likely to not buy leather clothes. You're more likely to buy cosmetics that aren't tested on animals. You have interest in certain products that vegans for other reasons wouldn't be interested in. So health vegans are more likely to exercise. They're more likely to eat whole foods. And that kind of thing. And then environmental vegans are more likely to be interested in recycled products. They're more likely to be interested in composting, let's say, or you know, an electric car. So you have different groups of vegans. I don't know if you'd want to call them vegans, and I think that the new definition was trying to be inclusive of those reasons more than anything.
Yeah, and I think there's what, about 15 or 20 different definitions that are like, you know, even just like the official from the pioneers that have been floating about over the years. I guess to me, because I hear what you're saying, I would probably lead to the same conclusion that when they say humans here, it is focused more on human health. I mean, even I mean, there's a while ago we did a breakdown of the definition. Even like every word of this could be, you know, there's a lot of things to unpack here. But I guess to me, even focusing on human health, I personally don't prefer to do. Like, I prefer just to say dietetic statement and leave it at that. Like, I think to go a step further is more the bonuses, and I'd rather spend that time focusing on establishing our fellow animals as unique individuals. So I agree. Like, to me, it gestures more like this that's highlighted right now. To me, is more the scope or kind of the broader outline, whereas this first portion is more kind of the focus. Which is kind of a key theme I would come back to on this.
I think that the health arguments are particularly are important for certain people, because if you go vegan for health reasons, you're likely to take on ethical reasons over time. Basically, there's a lot of research to actually suggest that as well, and so for certain people who are, you know, into fitness, or from certain, I would say, cultural groups, like if you're Chinese, a lot of Chinese people aren't really concerned about the environment or animal welfare. And so using a health argument to initially encourage them to go vegan or more plant-based could actually get them involved in veganism, interested in veganism, and then they'll take on the ethical principles afterwards. I mean, that's quite a common thing for people to do.
Well, I'd say rather than any particular group, probably most people don't have an animal-centric thought process. Otherwise, they'd probably be vegan in the first place. I guess what you're saying about the motivations, because I don't know if you've seen Trent Grassian's research, but that was very much around like the key motivators as well as setting end goals. And that was talking about the ethics being the strongest motivator, because I mean, I guess we're moving more into like the goal setting than necessarily the human issues stuff. But to me, I think if they align on the ethics, then the other stuff will come. I'm not as convinced the other way around, because I think most like social media groups focus so much on the dietary aspect of veganism or the food, that I think if people are in those groups, they're not going to get much on the ethics. That's why I guess my take on it is like making sure the ethics get in there, because if we can get that bolted on, they're going to be much more likely to stick with it. Because I think Trent's research pointed to basically the other motivators, like they still help and there's still some things to talk about there. Don't get me wrong, but they're not. People are more or less less likely to keep with it if they're doing it for them versus animals, as it were.
True.
I agree
I
with
think
what you're saying, though. You have to overcome it. Like if someone says we can't live without eating or using animals, like there's definitely something to discuss there.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because I think people fall into two groups. They either are health vegan and then they take on ethical motivations, or they probably stop being vegan. So it's kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, and just looking at some comments, I mean, I think Trash Carcass is just saying here around the politics side of things. I mean, I think another similar thread, and we're opening up all kinds of different things to unpack. I think we might leave today with more questions than answers, but as far as politics shouldn't be discussed, I mean, I think another theme that goes along with that is that the whole notion that veganism is apolitical, which I think in itself is a political stance. So, and I mean, basic level, like subsidies, we have to agree have a political undertone. So, like, if nothing else, like we have to combat subsidies, and to do that, we have to have some level of political involvement. Maybe not this early in the movement, but at least at some point we have to do something about those because they're basically canceling out the demand at this point.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think you should have more subsidies for plant farming as opposed to animal farming. I don't know, like, I think that, I mean, I find it quite, I don't know, I find it quite, I mean, I think that we can get a more vegan world through, I mean, we have got a more vegan world through essentially a capitalist system. I mean, if we encourage people to buy more vegan food, then more vegan food will be produced. It will become more accessible, more available, and at a lower price, and so more people will buy it. I mean, I don't know.
Well, and throw the capitalism one in the mix too. So we just talked about a few small concepts, right? Human issues, politics, now capitalist economic systems. I mean, I think there's a lot to go through here. I mean, I think what you said to me kind of, I don't know if you watch much of Catherine Klein's stuff on YouTube, but one framing that she's used is the whole like political but nonpartisan. So kind of, I mean, I'm not trying to equate positions, but it seems like building off of what was said earlier that there are political, topics like subsidies, but that there's not necessarily one party that necessarily addresses all of them. So that's kind of where I would see things. That it's not, yeah.
I got kind of confused with because people were at one point talking about Trump and they were like, "Oh, well, Trump supports subsidies." Well, Biden supports subsidies as well. I mean, he'd actually pushed through policies which increase subsidies for farmers. It was kind of silly.
Yeah, I mean, anyone. I mean, I'm most familiar with the U.S. system being American, but anyone that's going to be elected to a high-level office is going to be right of center, even if they identify as Democrat, at least at this stage. Like, there's not... that everyone's so pushed towards the center and very conservative in a lot of ways, which, I don't know, that might be... But to Trash Carcass's point, I mean, that is a potential to, like, get pulled into this whole discussion. If we were on the street, I agree. Like, if we start talking about the political systems and all of a sudden we forget to talk about the moral question of our fellow animals, I agree, like that's where I think it can be a bit of a distraction.
I mean, I suppose what I don't know.
Well, and I think building here also, this is back to what we were talking about earlier, that this is interesting, saying that it'll go one direction but not the other, specifically respecting humans, more respect for non-humans, but not necessarily the other way around. I mean, I'm only one, it's anecdotal, but I would say I'm a case of the other way around, that starting to live vegan has made me more aware of a lot of progressive issues and a lot of human issues that I wasn't as aware of before. So... I think it's a new space. I
Mm.
don't think we have a lot of data really that we can rely on. It's mostly anecdotal at this point.
Well, I find that I don't know how to say this, but like, basically, I find that when you, I don't know, I think there's a lot of division in the vegan community, and I don't know if you've heard about. So I don't know if you've heard about the theory of being ostracized. Have you heard about that?
You say the theory of.
Yeah, so it's a theory of being ostracized. And so basically what happens is that if you have a group of people, so like in the vegan outreach that I was in, they were all left wing, right? And so they ostracized me and kind of pushed me out of the group for being on the right. But what this ends up doing is this ends up essentially reducing the retention rate of vegans on the right. So it encourages them not to be vegan, but it also pushes people within the movement to be more left wing. It's quite interesting.
Perhaps, yeah.
I think it's like I don't know. I think if you want to basically create an echo chamber of left-wing vegans within veganism, ostracizing right-wing vegans is a good idea. If you want to create a movement which is for every single vegan and you want to encourage every single person to go vegan, then we need an inclusive movement of people with all different political beliefs. Because I'm more able to talk to someone who is, for example, I don't know, let's say Christian and practicing chastity, because I see connections between hormonal contraception and, well, I mean, hormonal contraception is tested on animals, it contains animal ingredients. I can talk about that with them. I agree with them about chastity. I mean, I'm more able to talk to that person than someone on the left is. I don't know. I think that we all bring in different perspectives of different issues.
So back to this, just the last comment then. So it sounds like you're not necessarily saying politics shouldn't be discussed, but you're just saying there should be politics discussed from both sides. Would that be framing your position?
I think that essentially we can't go without politics being discussed, because I think that people on both sides are very passionate about a number of different issues. I mean, and I think there are people like myself who care more about being pro-life than vegan, or certain political issues are just as important to me as veganism. I'm sure there are people on the left like that, and so I don't think that we can go without discussing political issues. And I think some of the political issues affect animals. I mean,
yeah. So it sounds like we're on at least agree on in the sense that politics does have an influence on animal use. So I mean, that's some common ground there, I'd say. Now, obviously, how we go about that, politics is obviously not a straightforward topic, but so to that end, in that case where pro-life is a bigger priority to veganism, even for someone like yourself who's been vegan for 10 years, if we approach someone who isn't vegan, who's not, just vegan curious or maybe not thinking about it that seriously, if we put a strong stance against something they believe deeply, I can't help but wonder. I mean, and I'm not talking about oppressive views, but I'm talking about, political views, because I think that those two things it is good to separate, because not everyone that has a certain political belief also has oppressive views. I appreciate that's oftentimes confused. But I mean, aren't we reducing the chance of reaching them on animal issues if we, have poor optics around their issues, even if we see them differently? If you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm like. I mean, if I saw someone with an abortion is Medicare t-shirt, medical care t-shirt on, I'd either get someone else to talk to them, or I would say something, about veganism, or say something about, I don't know, body autonomy, or something vaguely related to what they have to say. But I find that's why political diversity is so important, because you're more able to talk to certain people than I am. And I'm more able to talk to certain people than you are, I think.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's a complicated thing because religion is another huge topic, which you've kind of touched on. I mean, because I think it might have some similarities. I mean, the way I go about it, I mean, I consider myself non-religious. I'm also not like strongly opposed to it either. Like, I'm just kind of agnostic, I guess. But if I come across someone who's strongly religious on the street, rather than like combat them, as it were, or challenge their religious beliefs, I'd prefer to work within that and not necessarily agree with it, but at least I'm not going to challenge that worldview at the same time as the way they view other animals. I'd prefer to focus on the animal issues and actually see, because I think there's some strong religious perspectives for being vegan too. So I'd rather focus there versus challenging them on the religious thing, which I think similar on the politics. I just see it being challenging if, like you say, I mean, the pro-life, pro-choice thing is probably one of the most controversial things things out there. But because if all of a sudden we can't outreach someone who believes the alternatives to us on the political spectrum, I think we substantially reduce our ability to engage with others about veganism.
The other thing I find is that there's a lot of, because I was watching this video and it was from this guy and he was talking about how degenerate society was, and I was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting video. So I was listening to his video and then he was talking about how woke the culture was and all of this stuff, and then he went on a tangent where he talks about how he went to a friend's house at the age of 16 and they cooked him a vegan meal and it was gross, and I was like, well, what's this got to do with your story? And I find that, I mean, it's like me, I'm a bit like anxious to go up to vegans on the street now because I think they're all left wing and I don't think I'm going to get on with them. But I think that that's a perspective that the right has on veganism. And I think we really need to challenge that perspective. And I find that if you're on the street and you're talking to someone who has completely different political beliefs to you, you have to try and engage with them on that level. You have to try and, I don't know, I think we have to try and fight that narrative that every vegan thinks the same.
Yeah, that we're not some monolith. Well, because I think back to the earlier topic of intersectionality, which is, like, as I said earlier, not necessarily a word I align with in general. But I think the same things happened, or a similar thing has happened there, at least, where there's this whole demonization of so-called intersectionals, which is similar to, I think, the demonization of vegans. Like, oh, they're just another vegan, oh, they're just another intersectional, and all of a sudden the ideas get pushed to the side. It's kind of like a shield to keep accountability for like addressing the ideas. That's like, so even if we like don't agree, like not necessarily you or I, but I think we kind of represent a pretty big groups of people in the movement that aren't necessarily talking to each other. I think even if we don't agree, like at least if we can like put the individuals to the side and focus on the issues, that's what I'd like to see happen, because I think there's way too much drama and focus on individuals at the moment. But yeah, that's probably a separate topic. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways we can take the conversation. I mean, so it sounds like we do think it should be addressed, though, because it sounded like initially you were thinking that human rights shouldn't be part of veganism. But if we're going to talk about human rights and outreach discussions, it already is. It kind of make it.
Well, I think politics is already entwined within veganism. I mean, I don't know if you can really get away from it. Because, I mean, people have lost their jobs over saying that vegans shouldn't have to talk about Black Lives Matter. People have not been told they can't come to outreach over saying that conservatives should be there, or that conservatives should be allowed to be there. I just find it very, I don't know. It's already very involved in veganism. I'm quite concerned that that the animal rights marches and various other vegan events are going to become, I don't know, kind of like the feminist march, where it's pushing kind of an anti-Trump narrative. And I'm kind of concerned that the animal rights movement is going to start doing that at some point.
Well, and I think it sounds like maybe on a theoretical level we agree to an extent of the relationship. So maybe it's just the practical applications, which, to be honest, I think is representative of the wider movement. I think most of us would agree. I mean, because a lot of people who oppose the idea of so-called intersectionality also compare animal use to human injustices, which to me right there is a business case for why there's some relationships there. If you know, slavery and the Holocaust and those types of things. I mean, that in and of itself, we wouldn't be comparing to human injustices if they had nothing to do with each other.
I mean, I get you, but then I think that, how do we say this? Basically, certain human rights issues, especially the ones we talk about in the West, are very complex. So, for example, like, I don't know, let's say trans women being able to enter female prisons, okay? Well, the issue with that is the fact that if they stay in male prison, they have a quite high chance of getting raped by male prisoners. If they go into the female prison, they have a high chance of raping female prisoners. And so I think that intersectionality, where you're trying to assert that trans women are women. I mean, they're not women. They're trans women, and I would be fine if trans women wanted their own separate rights. I mean, I would be fine if they wanted their own, prison or prison floor or something. But it's when trans rights are trying to impeach on women's rights that I have an issue, and I suppose that's why these issues are so complex, I think.
Well, in that example, I mean, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but I would suspect the former example is probably much more likely than the latter, where the trans women are going around in prisons causing issues. But I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. So in fairness, I haven't looked into that topic in general, specifically with the prisons.
It's pretty even.
Yeah, well, I mean, feel free to. I mean, I'd be curious if you have stuff. I mean, maybe we can send it to me afterwards or something. I mean, so it sounds like we agree there's entanglement, but we're not sure how to approach it. I mean, on the surface, it actually sounds like you're keener to talk about politics and vegan outreach than I am. Would that be a fair?
I don't know.
Because I tend to swerve it because of the potential distraction, unless it's something oppressive that needs to be addressed.
Well, I think that after being taken out of my, taken out of my vegan outreach group for like my YouTube channel, I've been a bit like kind of concerned about that.
Yeah. I think, because I mean, I think you mentioned earlier around the whole cancel culture thing, and there's different elements to that. I don't know, it's a really tough thing. I mean, it's a messy movement because like it's like trying to work with family members that we don't get along with in a lot of ways. Like we're just a whole bunch of humans with a whole bunch of different perspectives that don't always get along. And I think in some ways we do need to go our separate ways at times. But as a movement, I think I agree with you that we're very disjointed and that there's not a whole lot of alignment on a myriad of topics. I mean, my priority is welfare versus rights, but I agree on the human thing too.
Well, I find that like vegans seem to, some vegans, they seem to have this perspective that if you're vegan and you're at vegan outreach, you're gonna be friends with everyone there, and it's like, well, no, because every single vegan is different, and I think we're, well, as diverse a group as the general population. So just like picking a random person off the street and saying, oh, well, you have to work together or working work body. They might not be
Yeah.
necessarily people that you like or would have a drink with, but it's
Yeah, it's perhaps more likely if both people are vegan, but certainly not a given. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, but I'm seeing some great comments come through here because I think we dropped about half a dozen of the most controversial or least agreed upon things in the movement within like the first 10-20 minutes. So definitely have plenty to unpack. I mean, on subsidies, I mean, Philip's got a good point here around the consumption of vegan products without addressing the market distortions, specifically subsidies as well as bailouts. Not really kind of getting at the core issue. I'm conflicted on this one because I want to address subsidies, but I also think at 1% of the population, I'm not sure how we do that effectively. Because the people that are lobbying for subsidies, I mean, they literally throw billions of dollars at it. So I'm not sure as vegans how we can compete with that, kind of beat them at their own game. But I appreciate you were backpedaling. I'm just trying to pull a few of these comments in as well. Because I think there's probably some strength. Like, I mean, if people oppose subsidies in general, a lot of people don't know about the subsidies. I know in Ireland they talk about the subsidies a lot to the public, and they're like, really? I didn't realize they were getting free checks basically written to them. So I mean that could be a cool outreach angle.
I mean, that's quite an interesting one. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the only way that we can really move forward is by by trying to make vegan products more accessible, more available, and at a lower price. I think if vegan products are more accessible, more available at a price, more people are going to buy them, even if they're non-vegans. And so that will encourage people to eat a more plant-based diet. I mean, I've seen over the years that non-vegan family members, even if they're not living with me, they'll start eating more vegan food, and that's because and so I find that I don't know. I think that we need to work on that. But I mean that the only way we can really do that is by encouraging people to eat more vegan food.
Yeah, well, and I would say especially non-processed, animal-free food, because I mean I don't think that's already the common line goes, rice, beans, cheapest foods on the planet and all that stuff.
Well, I mean, I think all of the vegan desserts and all the vegan pizzas are quite good as well. I mean, I know that my aunt buys Chunky Monkey vegan ice cream because that's the only vegan, that's the only Chunky Monkey ice cream that they do in the shops. Is the vegan one, and so she'll buy that. I think as vegan products are becoming more, there's more choice as well. I mean, there's vegan Ben and Jerry's now. I'd rather people eat that than the normal one. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's interesting comments around the subsidies coming through. I mean, back to your earlier point about being more inclusive, and this is the whole thing I think that touches on the main core of this conversation is, I mean, on the one hand, we want as many people to be vegan as possible, but on the other hand, to Erfin's comment here, isn't it harder for members of marginalized groups to go vegan if the vegan community won't speak up to support them? So, all right, I'll let you open because you clearly have something to say on this one.
Basically, I just don't. It's just not how it works. I mean, whenever a left-wing vegan says something like, "Oh well, animals matter," and black people matter, and police officers shouldn't go around killing black people, and animals shouldn't be killed, then they're shot down by other vegans. They're shot down by the black community. They're told they're not really vegan by people on the left, and they're told that, well, it's time to talk about black people now. And it's like, well, when's the right time to talk about animal rights? And I don't think the black people who are going on about her it not being the right time to talk about animal rights would be with her, standing with her at an animal rights march. They're not going to do that. Also, if you have, I don't know, I think there's problematic behaviour on both sides. Now, if you have a left-wing vegan going up to someone who's conservative and they're like, oh, well, conservatives are Nazis, conservatives are this, conservatives are that, they're less likely to get shot down if there are no conservative vegans there. If you have a vegan there and they're saying something like, I don't know, I mean, I don't think that a vegan would do this, but if they start saying something like, black people can't be vegan, they'll be shot down by a number of members of the vegan community. I would shoot them down. I would say, what are you talking about? You know, I think that if you allow for freedom of speech, you're more likely to have people shut down for harmful opinions. And also, you're more likely to be able to challenge those harmful opinions, and you're more likely to be able to change their mind about things. I think when you start getting people out, pushing people out of the movement because they have the wrong opinion, you don't get rid of those opinions, you make them more radicalized. Getting rid of people off YouTube for having the wrong opinion, getting rid of Donald Trump off Twitter for having the wrong opinion, and all of these other, there are other right-wing commentators who've done that. What you're doing is you're making their opinions more radical, because they're moving on to other sites, they're moving on to pictures, they're moving on to not being challenged by anyone. And so I think that what you're doing is quite concerning.
Yeah, well, the whole issue of free speech is I mean, that's probably a separate call, to be honest, because if we get into that one, I think that's going to be challenging. I mean, back to the earlier comment, and I think to Trash Carcass' response, doesn't necessarily need to be part of animal rights. My perspective is in between kind of these two comments, that I would like to focus on campaigning for our fellow animals, but then also be mindful of human issues while we do it. And specifically, if someone comes at us with, you know, you vegans only care about the animals, or, you know, why aren't you caring about the starving, you know, children, you know, actually being able to say, well, you know, like during our hour that we have this conversation, 1,000 humans will starve to death, you know, and talking about feed conversion ratios and how veganism can actually help with that. I see that as being part of the scope, that we can be aware of all these things and hopefully be able to use it to strengthen our outreach, but then bring the focus back to our fellow animals versus spending too much time on the scope or exclusively on the focus. So that's kind of where I stand on this, in a very crude, if I were to give a crude 30-second overview. I'm not sure if that helps clarify what you're saying, though, because I think policing anyone else's activism gets really tricky. If someone emailed me and they're like, oh, Jeremy, you need to have more of this stuff on your page, I'd be kind of like, all right. But at the same time, if we're holding like oppressive views towards something, you know, like yourself having a strong view on one thing, if someone pushes back against that, I think that's not necessarily going to draw people in either, if that makes sense, what I'm saying.
I mean, what I think also is the fact that, I don't know, but like, what ends up happening is that you don't, I don't know, if you kind of get rid of people for having the wrong opinions, like they got rid of me for my YouTube channel, then what ends up happening is you end up fracturing the group. You don't end up getting rid of those people. They end up creating their own outrage. So it's like you're not actually stopping them doing activism in any way. You're just fracturing the group, creating two outreaches, or creating, like, I don't know.
Well, and I was going to say that around cancel culture too, because I mean that is kind of a I think we've probably brought up about a half dozen different topics that could be an hour on their own. But I mean, people don't really get canceled. I mean, that's like, I mean, I appreciate there is cancel culture. I'm not trying to deny it exists, but like, you know, if we look at in the U.S. some of the allegations, people will just, you know, as far as sexual assault goes, I mean, people would literally get fired, and then all of a sudden they'll pop up in another organization, you know, a few months later. So we're really just reshuffling the deck. I don't think, like you say, so I think even if it was the goal to stifle some of these opinions, I agree it's not effective because the people don't actually go anywhere.
Well, the other thing is that you're pushing people to go on other platforms. So I don't know. There are a lot of far-right political parties, and kind of commentators that were ethno-nationalists and that kind of thing, that were basically taken off YouTube. And okay, fine, but then they went on to BitChute, for example, right? They went on to another platform, and on these platforms, you don't really have left-wing people. You have more people that are more nationalist, and so it's like, well, they're only talking to other nationalists, and they're not de-radicalizing them. You're not getting them to embrace another point of view. You're not making them less racist. You're just pushing them to another platform where they can talk to other racists. It's
Well, and
I mean, that's the thing.
I'll throw another big topic into the mix, since might as well have some fun with it. But like social media, I don't know if you how much of the recent documentaries and stuff you've been watching around that, but I mean, because they feed us stuff that's going to engage us, it's also oftentimes the most divisive stuff. But it also, like, we engage with the content that speaks to us, so it really does push people into echo chambers, and, like you say, radicalize opinions, which, you know, if those opinions are good, I suppose it's a good thing. But like, if we're not seeing the other side, I agree, like, we need to talk to you know, across the aisle, as it were.
But that's one of the issues that I have with getting rid of people off YouTube, because at least on YouTube, everyone can see your video. And so if you're saying something like anti-gay or something like that, then a gay person can do a reaction. You have less of that if you have a site like BitChute, or a site which is used more by people on the right. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of like you're moving them off one platform onto another. And the other platform,
Yeah, I'll put my hand up. I'm a bit ignorant to, like, the cancel culture on YouTube, specifically within the animal community. I don't know of any big stories of animal advocates getting canceled on YouTube, off the top of my head.
So there was carnism debunked. He got fired from his job. And
I mean, as far as like being like, sorry to jump in there, but as far as like not like having their YouTube account removed. Not something happening to a YouTuber.
I think that in terms of, okay, well, there are things that happen to YouTubers, and then there are things that happen to animal rights activists actually being cancelled off online. So there was a woman called That Vegan Teacher. Do you remember That Vegan Teacher?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think it'd be hard not to hear that name the last few weeks.
So you've heard about her being cancelled off TikTok?
Yeah.
But that was. I mean, she did say some. She did make a video where she said Negro in it, and she was trying to.
She seems to be getting more radical. That kind of supports what you're saying. She's more radical now that she's been canceled off TikTok.
Well, basically, she was trying to make a point that people should, like, I don't know. This is a bigger topic anyway, but basically, she was saying that black people should take charge of Negro. That's what she was saying, and that they should like, embrace the word and not let it harm them. That's what she was saying.
How do you feel that? I mean, I appreciate we're two white people discussing this topic as well, but like, how do you feel about that? Like a white person telling the black community how they should reclaim words?
Well, I found basically, so that there's two different issues here. The first issue is the fact that what she should have done is she should have either not used offensive language in her video, because it was insensitive for really no reason, or B, what she should have done is got a black person to come on her channel, a black vegan, and said something, you know, did exactly the same video that she did, and said that she wants to. I think that what she was actually doing was essentially just to get views. She was causing controversy in order to get views and then get people more interested in animal rights.
Yeah, The whole kind of any coverage is good coverage mantra, I
Yeah,
guess, that some subscribe to. Well, I guess Tom's made a good point here, because I think, and this is probably what I've observed too, is that it's not necessarily, at least what I've observed, is YouTubers not necessarily having their accounts taken away like on other platforms like TikTok, but it's more so videos either being taken down, or probably the biggest thing is demonetized for any, like, a whole wide variety of reasons.
well, what I found was there was this one guy who had so he had Peppa Pig, right? And he was like, what really happens to Peppa Pig, and had animal slaughterhouse footage on it. And then it got taken down from YouTube. And this was during the time that there was lots of kind of inappropriate content on children's YouTube feeds. I kind of felt like, well, if you're a parent, you shouldn't give your child to watch this on outside, and you don't know what content they're going to be watching on YouTube. And you don't know if the content is going to be appropriate for the child. You don't know if it's going to be pushing something that you disagree with on the child. You don't know what the content's going to be, and you don't, also, like, certain children are scared by different things as well. So you could have a child that's really scared by clowns, and you could have a clown video that's supposed to be for children, and they might be really scared by it. It's kind of,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know how much experience you've had discussing animal issues with kids on the street. I actually find they're more prepared to engage with the topic, because I think they've had less years being influenced by the cultural speciesism. I find adults are actually much more resistant, and in some ways, much more resistant to, if we're talking about watching slaughterhouse footage. So there's that side of it. I agree that, like, kids are actually more prepared in a lot of ways. So we're kind of like saying we're protecting the kids, but actually there's probably a lot of adults that are probably more affected.
I just feel like kids shouldn't be watching YouTube, to be honest, because YouTube isn't a site for kids, and you can easily get to inappropriate content which isn't age restricted.
Yep.
It's quite easy to happen. And
that's probably true with social media in general, though, isn't it?
If you type in pig, you could easily go from, like, a cute pig video to pigs being slaughtered quite easily without, it's kind of a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, we are coming up on the hour. We kind of had that penciled in, but I think one thing, just so it feels like we've kind of addressed the vegan side of things. On the animal rights side of things, I mean, to me, I don't know how you feel about this concept, but I like to think of animal rights as being something that we share with our fellow animals. So, like, you have animal rights, I have animal rights, and talking about those basic moral rights. This is the shirt I'm wearing, like, basically the right to be respected, not bred, used, or killed. So in that sense, there's some commonality there, and then human rights are stacked on top of that. So in that sense, that's where it goes back to that focus scope thing. I still agree, focus on our fellow animals, focus on, their basic moral rights and respect for those. However, I think from a scope perspective, like, I think there's a lot of overlap between the two positions. Probably the biggest example is if someone says, animals don't have rights. If we're able to come back at them and say, well, do you think humans have rights, and have a discussion around that, that's where, like, there's a half dozen things off the top of my head that I think have helped my outreach, becoming more aware of these things. And I just can't help but wonder if that's true for the wider movement.
I mean, it depends on what kind of rights you're talking about. Because if you're talking about, like, I don't know, so you could compare, let's say, I mean, there are a lot of issues that people are against. So you could compare rape with animals being impregnated, or you could talk, I mean, you talk about the Chinese ethnic minority groups that are for certain human rights. I think where you kind of, I don't know, I think conservatives see a lot more contradictions between trans rights and women's rights and all of these other issues. We perceive issues differently as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's a challenge we face as a movement. Is we're trying to appeal to a wide number of people, that have a wide array of opinions. So trying to navigate that while not completely shutting the door to discussing animal issues. Because as an animal advocate, I feel like if I shut that door, I've kind of failed to do my job.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I mean, if we were to try to put a bow on this a little bit, it sounds like we perhaps agree there is some overlap, but it's maybe more about how to address that overlap.
True,
It sounds like
true.
you were saying it's good to have people at an event, for instance, that can speak to both issues, which on the surface of it, I think that does make sense. It's just a matter of maybe how much to navigate that. You know, if we look at the focus scope thing, do we have 100% on the focus, or do we have maybe 80-90% on the focus and allow for a little bit of the scope? Or does the scope actually need to get bigger? And that's where we get into like talking about more of these other issues alongside animal rights. And I think there's a lot of discussions, and you know, as animal advocates, we might take different approaches, but I'm at least keen to have the discussions. I feel like those have been kind of shut down thus far by a lot of groups. Do you think that's a fair? 60 minutes in about 60 seconds. I'm not sure how good that was.
Yeah, I think that's a fair account. I think pretty fair.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's some great comments still coming through. The thing I would encourage people to do is once the YouTube video publishes, these comments, they're still there, but you have to watch it back to see them. So if there is anything you want to keep going in the chat, do it on the main comments of the video, not in the live portion, so we can keep some of these threads going. Because I think if anything today, to me, this has been a success in the sense that we've kind of both shared our perspectives and kind of seen maybe a little bit of overlap, which to me is the way forward. And then we can still live in our, obviously, on our perspectives, but I think the more perspectives we're aware of, the better.
I think that definitely, I don't know, you talked about comparing the, this is another big topic, but I find when I was doing outreach, I used to say that the same gas that they used to gas pigs was used to gas the Jews in Nazi Germany. And I found that quite an effective comparison, because most people are very, it's kind of like, it kind of brings them an image, and then they kind of do, you know, human rights to animal rights in that way. So I find that's quite useful.
Well, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. To a certain extent, I am against using images of the Holocaust in some kind of vegan activism, because I think that that's a bit too insensitive. But I think you can say things in a more sensitive way that gives them the image and kind of connects those two ideas in their head without being completely insensitive.
Yeah, well, because there's a big difference there, isn't it? Because to me, it's not so much about the comparisons or the analogies or anything. To me, it's just reclaiming it, because the word Holocaust was originally for our fellow animals.
Okay.
So, but I agree. I mean, I've done a few live streams on that, and I feel like I've only scratched the surface on that one. To be fair, I mean, I've definitely come around a lot on that one, because I do think there's room to, like you say, be a little bit more mindful, and that's kind of my theme throughout all this stuff, is to be mindful of these issues versus, you know, pushing them to the side. Just asking, like, if this was happening to a human, what would we call it? And if someone starts talking, you know, in language that might be controversial, at least they're saying it. And I think that's, you know, going to work. I'd love to be on the street to try out some new questions around the Holocaust stuff, though. You know, if this was a human Holocaust, how would you oppose it? And then if they get pushback, you know, trying to talk about the speciesism and why is the word worthy for humans but not other animals and all this stuff. But yeah, that was an action-packed hour, I'd say. I don't know. I'm probably going to watch this back and just kind of ferment on a lot of it. Is there anything else you want to cover today before we kind of wind things down?
I don't think so. I think I've said all I wanted to say. Kind of. Yeah, I think I've said all I wanted to say.
Yeah, and again, like I did at the beginning, I mean, I appreciate you reaching out, because I think this same exact conversation, can you imagine trying to have in a comment section? I mean, I think
Yeah, true.
I know I don't know about you, but at least me, I'd probably be pulling my hair out because I wouldn't. It'd be so hard to articulate points, like both understanding the other person and being understood.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also like,
So,
I don't know, with comments, I used to spend ages trying to like, especially with non-vegans, I used to spend ages trying to formulate a point, and then I used to look up research to like go back to it, like print it out. It was so, I don't know, I took hours just writing comments online.
oh, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest challenge we have as animal advocates, and that could probably be another hour in and of itself. Is like where to put our time
Mm,
because, oh, I mean, comment sections like it's so complicated because the person you're engaging with could be super resistant. But if there's 20,000 people in the group or, even just 100 other people reading that, even if the person you're engaging with, if they don't, nudge at all, if other people reading it, you get them thinking like, then it's
mm.
worthwhile, but it's immeasurable too. So it's,
Oh,
yeah.
it's really interesting because I actually went vegan due to a Yahoo comment. So they had
A Yahoo
Yahoo,
comment.
yeah, it was Yahoo Answers. So it was like 10 years ago. They had Yahoo Answers, and someone asked, "Oh, are eggs vegetarian? No, are fertilized eggs vegetarian?" So that was a question. And then someone underneath said, "What's more of a concerning issue is the male chicks which are ground up alive at birth." And then that sent me on a tangent and it ended up with me going vegan.
That's a cool story. I think in a lot of ways, like, I know I try to tap into my story because
Mm,
that's a piece of the riddle I think we're all trying to figure out, and it's a different piece for each person or multiple pieces. But if we can tap into that, I agree because I've set up on my computer a lot of like canned responses, and I still customize them. But like we say some of the same things over and over, don't we? Like feed conversion
yeah,
ratios.
yeah.
It's nice to have two sentences like that I can just paste straight in.
Mm.
But yeah, I think during the pandemic we're kind of forced to do it over social media, so we might as well adapt and get better at it.
Well, I think that making videos is quite a good way to reach people, to be fair.
I
So
agree.
because I think especially if you're doing like a response to someone, because I'm probably I might do a video on like conservatives who've made like anti-vegan comments and respond to them, because that might be a good thing to do. But yeah, you can definitely get subscribers from that channel to go onto yours
Mm-hmm.
and they watch your video.
Yeah. I think, and I don't know what your experience has been, but I think certain platforms are more authentic than others. Like
Mm,
Facebook, I find it very hard to have meaningful dialogue on. But Reddit, for instance, I've had some really, I did a video a while back around one of the first videos I ever did before I started volunteering at sanctuaries, where a group of cows ran
mm.
over to us, and it was me, my partner, and my sister. And initially, it's kind of like, what's going to happen? But then I just knelt down, and they all kind of gathered around me, and I shared that on Reddit. And then all of a sudden, we had all this dialogue with non-vegans, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
wait, actually, cows aren't going to take over the planet. Like, don't get me wrong, there are, we have to be respectful around their space, and they can be dangerous in a way if we don't. But
It was
yeah.
quite funny because I remember my dad telling me a story that he climbed up a tree and then some cows gathered around this tree to look at him. And he spent an
Oh,
hour up
okay.
the tree because he was too scared to get down.
Well, I think that's the main thing I try to do through my content, because my main platform is actually Facebook, just because that's where I get
Mm,
a lot more reach. But that's to me the biggest thing to try to unpack, is just to get people to connect with other animals in a way. Most people who have a dog or cat family member have started to see them as individuals, and I think until
mm,
people have an interaction, it's really difficult to do that. But even then, it's like getting to other species and expanding that circle of respect. Which,
mm.
yeah, there's a lot to do in that space, but I guess we're kind of carrying on to a myriad of different topics here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and given it's the apocalypse at the moment, I appreciate we don't exactly necessarily have any Friday plans, but it's probably good to leave it there. And
I think so.
and yeah, sounds like there's more maybe to talk about going forward. So I think just thanks again for reaching out and for making this conversation happen. I mean, this is kind of a fairly new thing for me, just to impromptu stream like this on my channel by itself. So yeah, if anybody else wants to come on and chat, and I think if there's any of these topics after, thinking about them more, if we want to explore more, I'd be happy to do that. Because to me, this is where the future lies, and hopefully we can kind of close the gaps in the division, where it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely shared some of my. I shared my our stream on right wing vegans and various other platforms. So that was
Okay.
quite good.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds good, and we can keep the conversation going in various places, I guess, and see what we can do with it. Yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. I think, like I say, we will leave it there, but let's keep the conversation going in the comments and just with each other. Yeah, let's see if we can't try to address some of these massive issues that have seemed to have formed. And yeah, find a way forward together. So yeah, thanks everyone, and I don't know when my next one will be, but see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye. To be a guest on my next live stream, email me at veganinteractions@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. We can explore animal advocacy strategies, or I'm happy to respond to questions about veganism too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.